Let's face it, there's just something about fire that makes any kind of punishment worse. Getting burned at the stake is perhaps the most feared form of capital punishment ever. And throughout history, lots of people have died this way, including many innocent people who were accused of crimes they didn't commit. In medieval Europe, suspicion was enough to get you put to death in one of the most painful ways imaginable. In fact, sometimes your faith could be taken from you simply for the crime of holding beliefs that were different from the teachings of the Catholic Church. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to look at 10 horrifying ways that heretics were punished in medieval times. Watch until the end if you can stomach it. Some of these are straight up gruesome. Number 10. The heretic's daughter. According to legend, a heretic woman lived in southern France in the 13th century who had converted to what she believed was the true form of Christianity. She taught other women that the Bible should not be read literally and claimed that there were parts of the text that were misogynistic and didn't reflect God's true will. Her followers became known as the Free Spirit movement because they were thought to be untethered from the rules and restrictions placed on them by the church. The heretic was eventually captured and put on trial. The daughter was separated from her mother and locked in a room where she was forced to listen to the interrogation while hidden behind a screen. When the mother was sentenced to death, the daughter was told that she could take her mother's place if she would renounce her beliefs and return to the church. But when the girl refused, she was dragged out and burned at the stake. Number 9. Burning with lead. A pilgrim, who traveled around Europe during the late Middle Ages, wrote about one of the punishments that heretics faced that involved being burnt alive, but in a slightly different way than might be expected. This method of capital punishment involved pouring molten lead down over the condemned person's body. While the burning at the stake was usually reserved for those accused of heresy, those accused of lesser crimes could face punishment by molten metal. This was considered less severe than the stake, but still incredibly cruel and painful. No. 8. Burning after drowning. There were some heretics in medieval times whose punishments involved fire and water. This was usually reserved for those accused of witchcraft or heresy who were believed to have made deals with the devil. The accused would be tied up and thrown into a lake or river and left to drown. After a period of time, often 1 hour, the heretic would be pulled out of the water and set on fire and burnt to death. Sometimes the executioners would take their time and slowly pour flammable liquid on the struggling heretic before setting them ablaze. Others were doused with a flammable liquid and lit on fire while still submerged in the water. Either way, this was a terrible fate that no one would wish on their worst enemy. 7. Burning in wax. One particularly grisly way that a heretic might be punished was to be buried alive in wax. This torture method was used against those suspected of being witches. The heretic was wrapped in wax, similar to how a mummy might be wrapped in bandages, only this was not done to preserve their body. Instead, it was meant to keep the witch trapped and slowly suffocate them to death. After the heretic lost consciousness, they would be thrown into a fire and burned to death. As the wax melted, it would drip off the now dead body, leaving an oily residue all over the flames. Number 6. Being roasted. Another horrible way that heretics met their demise was by being roasted over an open flame. During the early modern period in Europe, roughly between the 15th and 17th centuries, people were publicly roasted as a form of entertainment. This happened to both heretics and non-heretics. Whole families would be put on display as their bodies were cooked slowly and deliberately over an open fire. People would gather around and watch the horror unfold before their eyes. Sometimes the food was served up afterwards for all the onlookers to enjoy. Sounds like a real feast. No. 5. Burning at the stake. Most of us probably imagine that the most common way that heretics were put to death during medieval times involved being burned at the stake. This was indeed the most common way that someone could die for their religious beliefs. Depending on the severity of their crimes, a heretic could be burned in different ways. Sometimes they were tied to the stake and then set on fire. Other times they were burned in a barrel or cage. Perhaps the worst way to be burned at the stake was the long death. This involved being tied to a cross and having small fires lit underneath them, slowly roasting them alive. All the while, the executioners might throw in small bits of firewood to keep the fire going. It's making sure that the heretic suffered for as long as possible? No, for hanging, burning, and drowning. Imagine if someone did all 3 of the punishments we have talked about so far in this video. Well, that was the fate of one man named John Birmingham. He was tried in England in 1287 for heresy and for insulting the Catholic Church. He was found guilty and sentenced to death. The sentence was carried out in London. John was first strangled by hanging, but instead of being left to die, he was cut down and thrown into the River Thames. After a short time, he was fished out and set on fire and burned to death. Number 3. The Heretic's End. Michael Servetus was a Spanish doctor and theologian who died in Geneva in 1553. He had written a book criticizing the Trinity doctrine of the Christian faith. He was charged with heresy and given the opportunity to recant his statements. But when he refused, he was executed in one of the most horrific ways imaginable. Servetus was chained to a wooden chair. His hands were bound behind his back, and his feet were also chained together. Then a red-hot musket ball was inserted into the opening between his genitals and anus. To make matters worse, the executioner decided to rub a red-hot musket ball on the man's chest as he was being led through the streets of Geneva. When the sentence was finally carried out, it was said that Michael Servetus cried out and went limp. It took him a full half-hour to die. No. 2. Burning at the Auto de Fe. The Auto de Fe, or public display of faith, was an event held in Spanish and Portuguese colonies during the 16th and 17th centuries. These events involved burning those accused of heresy, witchcraft, or other crimes against the Catholic Church. The show was meant to send a message to the rest of the community that the Church was powerful and was not to be messed with. At these events, people of all ages were put to death, including children. In one event in Lima, Peru, in 1638, 4 people were killed, 2 men, a woman, and a child who was only 12 years old. The child had been accused of cursing another girl and was burned alive in front of hundreds of people. No one was burning the heretic's house. Have you ever heard of the phrase, burn the house down? Well, in medieval times, this actually happened. Houses of accused heretics were sometimes burned down with the family inside. The idea was to force the heretic out of their homes so they could be arrested. But oftentimes entire families were burned to death in this way. In some cases, the houses were set on fire with flammable liquids like resin and sulfur. The charred remains of the victims were sometimes left hanging from the rubble of their former homes as a warning to others. Thanks for watching. Do you think the punishments fit the crimes? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you next time.